The screaming started at 4:30 in the morning, not the kind of scream you hear when someone sees a spider, but the raw primal shriek of someone discovering they've been sleeping in liquefied cow manure. I watched from my kitchen window as Karen Fitzgerald, president of the Willowbrook HOA, stumbled out of her designer camping tent like a swamp creature from a B-movie. Her usual lepristine blonde hair was matted with something dark and chunky, and her pink pajamas had turned an unfortunate shady-off brown. Green, she slipped on something squishy windmilled, her arms frantically, and landed face first in what I knew, Tobe. A fresh pile of bull droppings Thefleys were already gathering for their morning feast. Let me back up a week to explain how the most controlling woman in our neighborhood ended up camping next to my waste runoff pond. My name is Jake Morrison, and I own the last piece of agricultural land on the edge of Willowbrook Estates. My grandfather left 40 acres that included horses, cattle, and, yes, a retention pond that collects all the natural byproducts of raising live. When the developers built Willowbrook 15 years ago, they promised residents a country living experience while conveniently forgetting to mention that actual country living involves actual country smells. Karen had been gunning for me since she took over the HOA presidency 6 months ago. She'd already fined the Hendersons for having throng shade of beige on their mailbox and forced the Gwynns to remove their vegetable garden because it was too visible from the street. But I wash her white whale every week brought a new complaint about my property. The horseware too loud, the cattle smell drift over the walking trail, my farm equipment was an eyesore. She even tried to claim a rooster violated the noise ordinance. The fact that agricultural land is exempt from suburban regulations, the confrontation that led to her camping sister started the previous Monday. Karan marched up my driveway at 7 o'clock in the morning, clipboard in hand, wearing a blazer, despite the July heat behind her. Railed, intimidated, to speak up. Karen's voice carried that special tone of someone who'd watched too many courtroom dramas. She announced that HOA had received numerous complaints about unsightly. I take immediate action to eliminate the smell. I explained as patiently as possible that I'd owned this land since before Willowbrook existed, that property lines on my phone pointing out that the walking trail actually encroached on my land by about 10 feet. Face turned an interesting shade of purple. Chicest me of fabricating documents and making up zoning laws. When I suggested verify the information with certainty, she said she didn't need to because the HOA superseded all local ordinances. Even Bob looked skeptical at that claim. That's when Karen made her big announcement to prove that I was exaggerating the so-called agriculturenesis. She would organize a weekend nature camp out by the pond. She claimed HOA owned the land around the pond and had every right to develop it for community use. I tried to warn her. It really did. I explained that the pond wasn't a scenic water feature, but a waste retention system. I told her a booth runoff channels from the pastures. He mentioned the mosquitoes, the methansmal, and the fact that my both too intimidator with what she called hillbillies. She posted on the neighborhood Facebook page that night, inviting all residents to join her for Reclaim Our Green Spaces camping weekend. She painted him as a backward farmer trying to hoard community resources and promised to show Virian how the pond area could be transformed into a beautiful park. About 15 people signed up, mostly her loyal followers. who'd never actually seen Thepend up close. Friday afternoon arrived with Karen leading her expedition like a general going to war. She wore brand new camping gear that still had tags on I-10, carried enough bug spray to fumigate a small country. Her followers looked less enthusiastic as they got closer to Pond and the smell hit them. It was a particularly hot day, and the combination of 90 heat and concentrated animosity created a bouquet that could paint. Karen soldiered on declaring Thesmal was probably from illegal dumping that would be addressed once the HOA took control. I watched from my porch. Asti set up camp, Karen insisted on placing her tent closest to the water right, where the main drainage channel empties into the pond. The others spread out upwind, but even 50 feet away. The smell was overwhelming. By evening half the group had already made excuses to leave. A mosquitoes descended in biblical proportions, and someone spotted a water moccasin. Though it was probably just a harmless water snake, Karen maintained her position, telling the remaining campers that this was exactly why Theria needed HOA intervention. Then Thewether turned. Around 10 at night, a thunderstorm rolled in with thickened of rain that turns dirt roads into rivers. I knew what would happen next. The drainage channels from my pastures would have a flow, sending a tsunami of liquefied manure straight into the pond. From my house, I could hear the shouts as campers realized their tents were flooding not with clean rainwater, but with a brown chunky soup that rire of ammonia and decay. Most people grabbed what they could and ran for their cars, but not Corinne. She was determined to stick it out, according to Sandra, who told me Thestery later. Karen Lay spent hours trying to bail out her tent with a camp coop, refusing to admit defeat. She kept insisting it was just muddy water and thought I must have sabotaged them somehow. Around 2 o'clock in the morning, Ferdinand decided to investigate the commotion. Thebel, curious about the colorful tent, knocked over Karen's cooler and food supplies, then proceeded to relieve himself directly upwind of her shelter. That's when even Karen's iron will began to crack, but she stayed until morning, which brings us back to her emergence from the tent after her faceplant in the bull droppings. She tried torrents off in the pond, not realizing that would only make things worse. The pond water, thick with algae and waste runoff, clung to her skin like a second coat of Missouri. She screamed threats about lawsuits and health departments while trying to wipe the muck from her Eicher tent, a $300 model. She bragged a boot in Facebook was so contaminated it would need to be burned by the time Karen made it back to her car. Half the neighborhood gathered to watch. Someone was live streaming her threats about calling the police turned into confused sputtering hen. I reminded her she was trespassing private property. About the pond conditions, I'd even sent her photos off drainage channels. The real power shift came Monday morning. The video of Karen covered in manure had gone viral in our local community groups. Comments poured in from residents who'd suffered her tyrannical HOA rule, sharing stories of arbitrary fines and power trips. Someone created a meme of her faceplanting with the caption, "When you discover what BS really smells like." The county zoning office, alerted by the publicity, sent her a formal notice. Thatch had led a group trespass onto agricultural land and could face a charge. More importantly, the HOA board called an emergency meeting. Bob Martinez, finding his courage, at last made a motion to investigate Karen's claim that the HOA owned the pond land when they pulled the actual property records. They did not Only did the HOA not own the land, but Karen had been informed of this fact in 3 separate emails. Over the past 2 months, she deliberately lied to every Sandra Chen, made a motion for Karen's immediate suspension, pending a full investigation of her conduct. The meeting was packed with residents who'd seen the video when Karen tried to claim she was conducting legitimate HOA neighborhood. Another person pointed out that trespassing and getting covered in manure wasn't generally considered an improvement. The vote was unanimous, even from her usual supporters. Karen was suspended, as HOA filled with the sheriff's office couldn't be ignored, given the video evidence. While I didn't press for prosecution, was less than thrilled when clients started asking if she was Manure lady from the viral video. She wasn't fired, but she was quietly transferred to a different office.